A racist officer attacked a black man but did not expect the man to fight back. The man's reaction stunned everyone. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching this video from. The sun was just beginning to rise over the quiet suburbs of Atlanta, casting soft orange and pink hues over the horizon. The city was still waking up, its usual chaos subdued by the early hour. The rhythmic sound of sneakers hitting pavement echoed through the nearly empty park, accompanied by the steady, controlled breaths of the runner. Jamal Walker, a towering figure of athleticism, was focused on his morning routine. Every muscle in his body moved with precision, a testament to years of grueling training. The park was his sanctuary, a place where he could clear his mind and prepare for the challenges of the day. In the distance, birds chirped and the leaves rustled in the gentle breeze. For Jamal, mornings like this were a reminder of why he fought so hard to escape the traps of his upbringing. Born and raised in one of Atlanta's roughest neighborhoods, Jamal's journey to becoming an Olympic champion was anything but smooth. The streets had been an unforgiving teacher, showing him early on that survival often depended on strength, both physical and mental. His mother, a woman of unwavering resolve, had worked tirelessly to provide for him and his siblings after their father walked out. It was her determination that inspired him to rise above his circumstances. Now, with a gold medal hanging on his wall and sponsorship deals that could provide for his family for generations, Jamal knew he was one of the lucky ones. But, deep down, he also understood that his success didn't shield him from the realities faced by men who looked like him. As he turned the corner onto the next stretch of the park's winding trail, a police cruiser idled at the entrance. Jamal barely registered it. Police cars were a constant presence in his life growing up, and though they no longer filled him with fear, they still stirred a deep unease. He focused on his pace, letting his breathing guide him as he neared the vehicle. The officer inside, a middle-aged white man with a square jaw and cold blue eyes, leaned forward in his seat. Sergeant Mark Rains was in his 10th year on the force, and though he was known for being aggressive, his peers often described him as effective. He believed in order, and to him, maintaining order often meant asserting dominance over those he deemed a threat. As he watched Jamal approach, something about the runner caught his attention. Rains stepped out of the cruiser, his boots crunching against the gravel. He adjusted his belt, letting his hand rest on his holstered sidearm. Jamal noticed him now, his peripheral vision catching the movement. A knot formed in his stomach, but he kept running, hoping to avoid any unnecessary interaction. "Hey, you!" The officer's voice cut through the stillness of the park like a gunshot. Jamal slowed his pace, his heart racing, not from exertion but from the familiar sting of confrontation. He turned toward the officer, keeping his hands visible. "Yes, officer," Jamal said, his voice calm but firm. "What are you doing here?" Rains demanded, his tone sharp and accusatory. Jamal frowned, confused by the question. "Running," he said, gesturing to his athletic gear and the sweat dripping down his brow. Rains stepped closer, his eyes scanning Jamal's frame. "This park doesn't open until sunrise. You're trespassing." Jamal glanced at the sky, where the sun was already creeping above the horizon. "It's sunrise now," he said carefully. "I've been running here for years. There's never been an issue." "Don't get smart with me," Rains snapped. His hand moved to his belt, where his fingers brushed the handle of his baton. "Let me see some ID." Jamal's stomach churned. He hadn't brought his wallet. He never did during his runs. "I don't have it on me," he said. "I live just a few blocks away. If you need—" "You don't have ID?" Raines interrupted, his voice rising. "What are you hiding?" Jamal took a step back, his instincts telling him to de-escalate. "I'm not hiding anything," he said. "I'm just out for a run. If you'll excuse me." "I said stop," Raines barked, stepping into Jamal's path. "Hands where I can see them." Jamal froze, his hands instinctively going up. His heart pounded in his chest as he struggled to keep his voice steady. "Look, officer, I'm not looking for trouble. I'm an athlete, just training. You can check my records." "An athlete?" Raines sneered, his lip curling. "You think that makes you special? Let me guess, another thug who got lucky." The words hit Jamal like a punch to the gut, but he kept his composure. "I don't think I need to stand here and listen to this," he said, stepping to the side. Raines moved faster, grabbing Jamal's arm with surprising force. "You don't get to decide when this conversation is over." The grip was tight, the officer's knuckles whitening as he held on. Jamal's reflexes, honed through years of boxing, kicked in. He twisted free, not with aggression but with precision, ensuring he didn't escalate the situation. "Don't touch me," Jamal said, his voice low but firm. That was all it took. Raines reached for his baton, pulling it from his belt in one swift motion. The weapon swung through the air, aimed at Jamal's side. Jamal acted on instinct. His training took over as he sidestepped the blow and countered with a single, controlled punch. His fist connected with Raines's jaw, sending the officer stumbling backward onto the gravel. For a moment, there was silence. Jamal stood there, his chest heaving as he processed what had just happened. Raines lay on the ground, groaning, his hand clutching his face. The sound of tires screeching broke the stillness. Another cruiser pulled up and 2 officers rushed out, their weapons drawn. "Get on the ground, now!" one of them shouted. Jamal raised his hand slowly, his heart sinking as he realized the gravity of the situation. He knelt on the gravel, his mind racing. The life he had worked so hard to build was unraveling before his eyes. As they cuffed his wrists and read him his rights, Jamal's gaze fell on Raines, who was now sitting up with a smug, satisfied expression. Jamal knew this wasn't just about him. It was about something much bigger, something that had been brewing long before this moment. And now he was caught in the middle of it. The cruiser sped through the city streets, its siren piercing the air. Jamal sat in the back, his hands cuffed tightly behind him. The cold steel bit into his wrists, a sharp reminder of the surreal nightmare unfolding around him. His mind raced, trying to piece together what had just happened. The park, the officer, the punch, everything played on a loop, each detail more absurd and infuriating than the last. Through the barred window, Jamal saw the familiar landmarks of his neighborhood pass by, now distorted through the lens of humiliation. He was no stranger to police attention. Growing up in Atlanta, he had seen it all. Friends harassed for standing on the wrong corner, relatives arrested for crimes they didn't commit. But this was different. This time it was him, and the stakes felt impossibly high. The cruiser screeched to a halt in front of the precinct. The officer in the driver's seat glanced at him through the rearview mirror, his expression a mix of contempt and indifference. "Out," he barked, opening the door. Jamal stepped out, his movements careful and deliberate. He knew any wrong move could escalate the situation. The officers flanked him, leading him into the building as if he were some dangerous criminal. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an unforgiving glare on the stained linoleum floors and peeling walls. The stares from other officers burned into him as he was marched past the desks. They brought him to a small interrogation room, bare except for a metal table and 2 chairs. One of the officers pushed him down into the chair, removing the cuffs, but leaving his wrists sore and red. Jamal rubbed them absent-mindedly, his eyes scanning the room. He had seen rooms like this in movies and TV shows, but sitting in one was a different reality entirely. "Sit tight," the officer muttered before leaving the room, the door clicking shut behind him. Jamal exhaled slowly, trying to steady his nerves. His thoughts were interrupted by the door opening again. A middle-aged man in a rumpled suit walked in, a file folder tucked under his arm. His eyes were sharp, taking in Jamal with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "Mr. Walker," the man began, sitting down across from him, "I'm Detective Harris. Do you know why you're here?" Jamal leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. "I have a pretty good idea," he said evenly, "but maybe you'd like to explain it to me." Harris opened the folder, pulling out a piece of paper and sliding it across the table. It was a printed copy of an incident report. Jamal's eyes skimmed the words, his jaw tightening as he read, "Assault on a law enforcement officer." The details painted a picture far removed from the reality he had just lived. According to the report, Jamal had attacked Officer Raines unprovoked, landing a brutal, deliberate blow that left the officer injured. There was no mention of Raines's aggressive behavior, no acknowledgement of the baton or the provocation that led to the punch. The report was a fabrication, and Jamal could see the narrative taking shape. A violent athlete, out of control, posing a threat to public safety. "This is a joke," Jamal said, pushing the paper back toward Harris. "That's not what happened." Harris raised an eyebrow. "Then tell me what did." Jamal recounted the incident in as much detail as he could, his voice steady but tinged with frustration. He described the initial confrontation, the insults, the physical provocation. He emphasized that his punch was an act of self-defense, a reflex honed through years of training. When he finished, Harris leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Interesting story," he said. "But there's a problem. We don't have any evidence to back it up." "What about the park's cameras?" Jamal asked. "They should have caught everything." Harris shook his head. "The footage from those cameras has gone missing." Jamal's stomach dropped. He had expected resistance, but this felt like a coordinated effort to bury the truth. "Missing?" he repeated. "How convenient." Harris didn't respond. His gaze locked on Jamal. "Do you have anyone who can corroborate your story? Witnesses? Anyone at all?" Jamal thought back to the park. It had been almost empty that morning. He hadn't seen anyone close enough to witness the altercation. "No," he admitted, his voice low. "I was alone." Harris sighed, closing the folder. "Look, Mr. Walker, this isn't looking good for you. You assaulted a police officer. That's a serious charge. If you cooperate, we might be able to work out a deal." "A deal?" Jamal's voice rose, anger bubbling to the surface. "You're asking me to plead guilty to something I didn't do?" Harris remained calm, almost too calm. "I'm just saying you should think about your options. The court isn't going to take kindly to a man with your background going up against law enforcement." Jamal's eyes narrowed. He knew what Harris meant by background. It was the same coded language he had heard his entire life, the polite veneer over deeply ingrained prejudice. The door opened again, and a new figure stepped inside. It was Officer Raines, his face sporting a fresh bruise on his jaw. He smirked as he looked at Jamal, a predator savoring his victory. "You've got a hell of a right hook," Raines said, his tone mocking. "Too bad you won't be using it for a while." Jamal clenched his fists under the table, his knuckles whitening. He forced himself to stay silent, knowing that any reaction would only play into their hands. "I'll leave you two to chat," Harris said, standing up. He gave Raines a pat on the shoulder before walking out of the room. Raines took Harris's seat, leaning forward with a smug grin. "You think you're special, don't you? Olympic champion, local hero. But out here, you're just another thug who doesn't know his place." Jamal met his gaze, his voice low and steady. "You attacked me. You know that, and I'll prove it." Raines chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Good luck with that. The system's on my side, kid. You're just a headline waiting to happen." He stood, smoothing his uniform before walking to the door. "Enjoy your stay," he said over his shoulder before leaving the room. Jamal sat there, the walls closing in around him. The odds were stacked against him, the truth buried beneath layers of lies and corruption. But as despair threatened to take hold, a single thought anchored him. He had fought his entire life to prove people wrong. He wasn't going to stop now. The cell door slammed shut behind Jamal with a metallic clang, echoing down the cold, sterile hallway. He sat on the hard bench, his hands clasped together as he stared at the wall. The air in the holding cell was heavy with the mix of sweat, despair, and frustration. Around him, a few other detainees occupied their own corners, some mumbling to themselves, others simply resigned to their situation. For Jamal, this was unfamiliar territory. He tried to focus his thoughts, replaying every second of the encounter with Raines. His mind latched onto details, the insults, the baton, the instinctual punch. It had all happened so fast, but the truth of it was clear in his head. The challenge now was making others see it, in a system designed to dismiss men like him before they could even speak. Hours passed. The buzz of fluorescent lights and the muffled conversations of officers beyond the bars became a monotonous backdrop. Just as Jamal began to think he'd be left to rot in the cell overnight, the metallic scrape of keys reached his ears. The door swung open, revealing a petite black woman in a crisp navy suit. "Jamal Walker?" she asked, her tone firm but not unkind. "That's me," he replied, standing up. "I'm Lisa Carter, your lawyer," she said, stepping inside. Her dark eyes scanned him with a mix of professionalism and concern. "We've got a lot to talk about. Let's go." She led him to a small meeting room down the hall. Once they were seated, Lisa pulled out a notepad and clicked her pen. "I've read the incident report," she began, her voice measured. "It's not good. They've got you on record as the aggressor." "That's a lie," Jamal said, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "He came at me first. I was defending myself." Lisa nodded. "I believe you. But belief isn't enough. The video footage from the park is conveniently missing, and without witnesses, it's your word against a police officer's. That's a steep uphill battle." Jamal leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table. There has to be something. People in the park, the cameras, someone saw something. Lisa sighed, setting her pen down. "I've handled cases like this before, Jamal. Missing evidence, falsified reports, judges who won't even look at the facts. You're not the first black man to be caught in a system rigged against him." Her words stung, but they carried an undeniable truth. Jamal sat back, his shoulders slumping. "So what do we do?" "We fight," Lisa said simply, "but it's not going to be easy. The first step is getting your side of the story out there. There's a journalist I trust, Malik Hanks. He specializes in exposing police misconduct. I've already reached out to him." Jamal frowned. A journalist? Won't that just make things worse? Not if we do it right, Lisa said. Public pressure can make all the difference. If Malik can dig up evidence of a pattern with Rains, complaints, excessive force, anything, we can use it to build your defense. Jamal considered her words. He didn't like the idea of his personal life becoming public fodder, but he also knew that staying silent wasn't an option. "All right," he said finally. "Let's do it." The meeting with Malik Hanks took place later that evening in a quiet corner of the precinct's visiting area. Malik was a tall, wiry man with glasses perched on the bridge of his nose and a notepad in hand. He exuded a calm confidence that immediately put Jamal at ease. "I've heard about you," Malik said as they shook hands. "Olympic champion, community hero. Quite the fall from grace they're trying to paint here." Jamal winced at the bluntness, but he appreciated the honesty. "I'm not here to play the victim," he said. "I just want the truth out there." "Good," Malik said, flipping open his notepad. "Then tell me everything." Jamal recounted the events of that morning once again, this time with Malik's probing questions guiding him into deeper details. Malik scribbled furiously, occasionally nodding or muttering, "That's important." When Jamal finished, Malik leaned back in his chair, tapping the end of his pen against his lip. "Rains isn't a stranger to this kind of behavior," he said. "I've covered cases involving him before. Allegations of harassment, excessive force, all swept under the rug, but none of it stuck. If we're going to prove he targeted you, we need something solid." "What about the missing footage?" Jamal asked. "Can't someone recover it?" Malik shook his head. "That's a long shot. If it's been erased, it's gone for good. But I've got other angles to explore. There might be witnesses who didn't come forward yet, and I can dig into Rains's past." "Do it," Jamal said firmly. "I'll give you whatever you need." Malik nodded. "This won't be easy. The system doesn't like to be exposed, especially when it comes to cops, but I've taken on worse." The next day, Jamal found himself back in his cell, awaiting updates from Lisa and Malik. He had expected the hours to drag, but they passed in a haze of reflection. He thought about his mother, the sacrifices she made to keep him off the streets. He thought about his boxing coach, who had seen potential in a scrawny teenager and pushed him to greatness. Most of all, he thought about the countless young men who never got the chances he had, their lives derailed by encounters like the one he'd had with Rains. He couldn't let this break him. Too much was at stake. Not just his career, but his integrity, his future, and the example he set for others. When Lisa returned that evening, her expression was a mix of hope and determination. "Malik's already making progress," she said. "He found 2 complaints against Rains that were buried by the department. We're also getting calls from people who saw you in the park. It's not much yet, but it's a start." Jamal allowed himself a flicker of hope. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As the lights dimmed in the precinct, Jamal lay on the hard cot in his cell, staring at the ceiling. His body ached from tension, but his mind was sharper than ever. They had underestimated him, thinking he would crumble under pressure. But Jamal Walker didn't crumble. He fought. And this was just the beginning. The courtroom was packed to capacity, the low hum of murmurs and shuffling feet filling the air. Outside, chants from protesters echoed faintly through the walls. "Justice for Jamal" signs bobbed in the crowd as cameras flashed, capturing every angle of the growing movement. Inside, the tension was palpable, the weight of a deeply fractured system pressing on everyone present. Jamal sat at the defendant's table, flanked by Lisa Carter on one side and her assistant, a sharp-eyed paralegal named Aaron, on the other. Dressed in a fitted suit, Jamal exuded a quiet dignity, his shoulders squared despite the circumstances. The chains that had bound his wrists during his initial arrest were gone, replaced by an invisible tether of public scrutiny and systemic bias. At the prosecutor's table sat Assistant District Attorney Matthew Price, a seasoned litigator with a reputation for ruthlessness. Next to him was Sergeant Mark Rains, his jaw still slightly bruised but his demeanor smug, his uniform crisp as if to underscore his supposed innocence. Jamal's gaze lingered on Rains for a moment, his fists tightening under the table. "Don't let him get in your head," Lisa murmured, leaning toward him. Her tone was calm but firm, her presence a steadying force amid the storm. The judge entered, a stern-faced man in his 60s with graying hair. "All rise," the bailiff called, and the room stood as one. The judge's gavel struck the sound block, silencing the room. "This court is now in session," the judge announced. "The state of Georgia versus Jamal Walker." The trial began with the prosecution presenting its case. ADA Price wasted no time painting Jamal as a dangerous individual, exploiting his boxing career to frame him as a man prone to violence. He highlighted Jamal's physical prowess, suggesting that his punch was not self-defense, but an intentional act of aggression. "Mr. Walker is a professional fighter," Price declared, pacing in front of the jury. "He is trained to incapacitate with precision. On that morning, he didn't act out of fear. He acted with malice." Lisa objected, her voice cutting through the courtroom. "Your Honor, the prosecution is speculating about my client's intentions without evidence." "Sustained," the judge said, though the damage was done. The jury's expressions were a mix of curiosity and skepticism, their eyes darting between Jamal and the prosecution. Price then called Rains to the stand. The officer recounted his version of events with the ease of a man accustomed to lying under oath. He described Jamal as agitated and uncooperative, claiming that the punch came without provocation. "He looked at me with pure rage," Rains said, his voice steady, his expression almost theatrical. "I feared for my life." Jamal's jaw clenched as he listened, every word a twisted distortion of the truth. Lisa placed a calming hand on his arm, her touch grounding him. When it was Lisa's turn to cross-examine, she approached the stand with the precision of a surgeon. Her questions were sharp, designed to poke holes in Rains's story. "You testified that you feared for your life," Lisa began, her tone neutral. "Yet you're a trained police officer, armed and equipped with non-lethal tools. My client, on the other hand, was unarmed. Why would a professional like yourself feel threatened by a man simply standing his ground?" Rains shifted uncomfortably in his seat. It wasn't just his stance, it was his demeanor. Lisa raised an eyebrow. "His demeanor?" "He was aggressive," Rains insisted. "You could see it in his eyes." Lisa let the statement hang in the air for a moment before delivering her next blow. "And this aggression you speak of, it occurred after you approached him, accused him of trespassing and demanded ID, correct?" "Yes," Rains admitted, though his tone was begrudging. "Did you inform my client that he was under arrest before attempting to physically detain him?" Rains hesitated, the pause stretching uncomfortably. "No," he said finally, "but No further questions," Lisa said, cutting him off and returning to her seat. The jury's murmurs suggested that the seeds of doubt had been planted. The defense began its case the following day. Lisa's strategy was clear: humanize Jamal, expose Rains's history of misconduct, and dismantle the narrative that Jamal was a threat. Jamal took the stand, his testimony measured and heartfelt. He spoke of his upbringing, his journey to becoming an Olympic champion, and his dedication to mentoring youth in his community. He described the events in the park with clarity, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "I didn't want to hurt anyone," Jamal said, looking directly at the jury. "But when someone swings a weapon at you, your instincts take over. I defended myself because I had no other choice." Malik Hanks's investigative work proved invaluable. He unearthed multiple complaints against Raines, including a damning case where the officer had harassed another black man under similar circumstances. Though the complaints had been dismissed internally, the details painted a clear picture of a man who abused his power without consequence. Malik also tracked down a jogger who had witnessed a part of the incident in the park. The jogger, a middle-aged woman named Carol, testified that she saw Raines approach Jamal aggressively and draw his baton before Jamal defended himself. The trial dragged on for days, each side presenting evidence, arguments, and counter-arguments. Public interest grew with each passing day, the courtroom packed with supporters and detractors alike. Outside, the protests intensified, the chants of justice for Jamal growing louder. But, as the trial neared its conclusion, Lisa could feel the uphill battle they faced. The judge had dismissed some of their evidence, and the jury remained stoic, their true leanings hidden behind unreadable expressions. On the final day, Lisa delivered her closing argument with passion and precision. She implored the jury to look beyond stereotypes and media narratives, to see Jamal as a man who had been targeted and vilified because of the color of his skin. "This isn't just about Jamal Walker," Lisa said, her voice echoing through the courtroom. "This is about accountability, about standing up to a system that too often fails to protect the very people it's meant to serve." As the jury left to deliberate, Jamal sat in silence, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. Lisa placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression one of quiet determination. "No matter what happens in there," she said, "we've made them listen. And that's a start." Jamal nodded, though the weight of uncertainty pressed heavily on his chest. For now, all he could do was wait. The hours felt like days as Jamal sat in the courtroom, waiting for the jury to return with their verdict. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional murmur from the spectators or the rustling of papers at the lawyers' tables. Outside, the chants from protesters grew louder, echoing through the walls like a heartbeat for justice. Jamal tried to focus on anything but the uncertainty of the moment. He thought about his mother, who was undoubtedly glued to the television at home, praying for a miracle. He thought about the kids he mentored, who looked up to him as a symbol of resilience and success. What would they think if he didn't win this fight? What lesson would they take away? The bailiff's voice snapped him out of his thoughts. "All rise." The jury filed in, their faces unreadable. Jamal's heart pounded in his chest as he stood, his hands gripping the edge of the table. He glanced at Lisa, who gave him a small, reassuring nod. She had fought tooth and nail for him, and regardless of the outcome, he knew she had given everything she had. The judge addressed the jury foreperson, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and a somber expression. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor," she replied, her voice steady. "Please read the verdict." Jamal held his breath, his entire world hanging on the edge of her words. "In the case of the state of Georgia versus Jamal Walker, we find the defendant—" She paused, her eyes flickering toward Jamal before continuing. "Not guilty." The words hit him like a tidal wave, relief Disbelief and a surge of emotion coursed through him. He felt his knees go weak, and he had to grip the table to steady himself. Lisa placed a hand on his shoulder, her smile triumphant but restrained. The courtroom erupted. Cheers from his supporters drowned out the disappointed murmurs of Raines's backers. The sound of the judge's gavel brought the room back to order, but Jamal barely registered it. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, he could breathe again. As Jamal stepped outside the courthouse, the bright sunlight was blinding after the dim confines of the courtroom. The crowd of protesters erupted into cheers as he emerged, their signs waving high in the air. Journalists swarmed, microphones and cameras thrust toward him as questions were shouted from all directions. How do you feel about the verdict? What's your message to the community? Do you think justice was served today? Jamal raised his hands to quiet the crowd. His voice was steady but filled with emotion as he addressed the sea of faces before him. This isn't just a victory for me, he began, his words carrying over the noise. This is a victory for everyone who has ever been silenced, everyone who has ever been treated as less than because of the way they look. But this fight isn't over. It's just the beginning. The crowd roared in response, their chants of justice for Jamal morphing into something larger, a call for systemic change. Later that evening, Jamal sat in Lisa's office, the adrenaline of the day finally wearing off. Malik was there too, his notepad filled with observations from the trial and notes for the expose he planned to write about Raines and the corrupt system that had tried to bury Jamal. Today was a win, Lisa said, leaning back in her chair. But you need to understand something, Jamal. Raines may have lost this battle, but he's not the only one. The system is still very much intact, and it's going to take more than a courtroom victory to change that. Jamal nodded, her words sinking in. I get it, he said. That's why I don't want this to stop here. I've got a platform and I'm going to use it. Not just for me, but for everyone who's been through what I have. Malik looked up from his notepad, a spark of inspiration in his eyes. We can start by telling your story the right way. Not the version the prosecution tried to sell, but the truth. If people see what you went through, it could shine a light on what's happening every day to people without your resources or visibility. Jamal thought about it for a moment, then nodded. Let's do it. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Malik's article went viral, detailing not only Jamal's case, but also exposing Raines's long history of misconduct. Public outcry grew louder, demanding accountability from the police department. Activists called for a federal investigation, and petitions circulated, gathering thousands of signatures. Jamal, meanwhile, threw himself into community work. He visited schools and youth centers, sharing his story and encouraging young people to stand up for what was right. He partnered with local organizations to create safe spaces for kids to train, learn, and grow, a place where they could see their potential beyond the labels society tried to place on them. One evening, as Jamal was locking up the gym he had started, his phone buzzed with a notification. A news alert flashed across the screen. Sergeant Mark Raines indicted on charges of falsifying reports and excessive use of force. Jamal stared at the headline, a mixture of satisfaction and resolve settling over him. This was just one step in a much larger fight, but it was a step in the right direction. On the anniversary of his acquittal, Jamal stood on a stage in front of a massive crowd. Activists, community leaders, and everyday citizens had gathered to celebrate the progress made and to rally for the work still ahead. Behind him, a banner read, "Justice, Accountability, Change." Jamal took the microphone, his voice carrying over the crowd. 1 year ago, I stood in a courtroom and fought for my freedom, but this fight isn't just about me. It's about all of us. It's about creating a system that values truth over power, justice over prejudice, and humanity over hate. The crowd erupted into applause, their energy electric. Jamal looked out over the sea of faces, seeing in them the determination he felt in his own heart. The fight was far from over, but Jamal Walker was ready. And this time, he wasn't fighting alone. The crisp morning air carried the faint sound of laughter and the rhythmic thuds of boxing gloves hitting punching bags. Jamal stood at the edge of the gym's training area, his arms crossed as he watched a group of kids practice their jabs and footwork. The once abandoned warehouse had been transformed into a thriving community center, now buzzing with life and energy. It had been a year since the trial, and though the scars of that experience still lingered, Jamal had poured his focus into something bigger than himself. The Walker Community Gym was more than a place for physical training. It was a sanctuary for young people in the neighborhood, a space where they could feel seen, valued, and protected. "Keep those hands up, Darius," Jamal called out, his voice cutting through the chatter. A scrawny boy with wiry arms and a determined expression adjusted his stance, throwing a sharper jab. Jamal nodded in approval. "That's better. Stay disciplined. You've got this." Darius grinned, the encouragement lighting up his face. Jamal felt a pang of recognition. He saw his younger self in these kids. Their struggles, their hunger for something more than what their environment offered, mirrored the path he had walked. The gym wasn't just about boxing. In one corner, tutors helped kids with their homework, their tables stacked with notebooks and textbooks. In another, a local artist guided a group of teens through painting a mural on the wall. The artwork depicted scenes of strength and unity, with Jamal's likeness subtly included among the towering figures of community leaders and activists. Jamal walked over to Malik Hanks, who stood by the mural, jotting notes into his ever-present notepad. "You're here early," Jamal said with a smirk. "Couldn't stay away," Malik replied, not looking up. "This place is alive, man. It's inspiring." "Thanks to your article," Jamal said, leaning against the wall. "It turned the tide when we needed it most." Malik finally looked up, shaking his head. "Don't give me too much credit. You fought that battle. I just told the world what they needed to hear." Their conversation was interrupted by Lisa Carter, who strode in with her usual air of purpose. She carried a folder in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. "Am I interrupting, or can I get a minute of your time?" she asked, directing her question at Jamal. "Always," Jamal said, motioning her over to a quiet corner. Lisa placed the folder on the table between them, her expression serious. "I wanted to update you on the fallout from Raines's case." Jamal's jaw tightened. "What's the latest?" "Raines took a plea deal," Lisa said. "He admitted to falsifying reports and excessive force. He's been stripped of his badge and sentenced to 5 years in federal prison." Jamal exhaled, the news a mix of satisfaction and lingering frustration. "It's something, but it doesn't feel like enough. He's just one piece of a broken system." Lisa nodded. "True, but it's a start. And his case has opened doors. There's a federal task force now investigating misconduct in the department. Change is slow, but it's happening." Jamal leaned back, processing the information. "I'm not stopping here, Lisa. This gym is just the beginning. I want to do more. Push for reform, hold people accountable." "That's what I was hoping you'd say," Lisa said, a rare smile crossing her face. "Because there's a coalition forming, and they need voices like yours. Leaders who've been through the fire and come out stronger." Jamal didn't hesitate. I'm in. That evening, as the sun set over the city, Jamal stood on the rooftop of the gym. The skyline stretched before him, a mix of glittering lights and shadows. It reminded him of the dualities in his own life, the struggle and the triumph, the pain and the purpose. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from his mother. Proud of you. Always. He smiled, tucking the phone away. His mother's unwavering belief in him had carried him through his darkest moments. Now, he felt a responsibility to honor that faith, not just for her, but for everyone who looked to him as a symbol of hope. The door to the rooftop creaked open, and Malik joined him, holding 2 bottles of water. Thought you might need this, he said, handing one to Jamal. Thanks, Jamal replied, taking a sip. They stood in silence for a moment, the city's hum filling the space between them. You ever think about going back to the ring? Malik asked suddenly. Jamal chuckled. Sometimes. But this is where I need to be right now. The ring taught me discipline and resilience. But out here, this is a real fight. Malik nodded, his respect evident. You're building something bigger than any title or trophy. That's legacy. Jamal turned to him, his expression thoughtful. It's not just my legacy. It's theirs too. The kids, the community. If I can help them see their worth, their power, then it's all worth it. The next day, Jamal stood before a packed room at a town hall meeting. Community members, activists, and local leaders filled the seats, their eyes fixed on him. He took a deep breath, stepping up to the microphone. This past year has been the hardest of my life, he began, his voice steady. But it's also been the most transformative. I've seen firsthand what happens when we come together, when we refuse to back down in the face of injustice. Change doesn't come easy, and it doesn't come fast, but it starts with us, right here, right now. The room erupted into applause, the energy palpable. Jamal looked out at the crowd, feeling the weight of their expectations, but also their belief. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore, he was fighting for all of them. As the applause died down, Jamal's gaze fell on a group of kids sitting in the front row. Among them was Darius, his face lit with admiration. Jamal smiled, a quiet resolve settling over him. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, he felt ready for whatever came next. Together, they would build a future where justice wasn't just a word, it was a reality. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories. Share this video with your friends to discuss what you think about these situations. Don't forget to watch other videos on the channel. Each of them reveals new sides of human struggle and strength of spirit.